Good morning, everyone. My name is David McGarvey. I'm the Learning and Teaching Director for the School of Chemical and Physical Sciences, and I'm a reader in chemistry. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce my colleague, Laura Hancock, but before I do so, just place things in context a little bit. So Trevor's already mentioned, Keel's fantastic reputation for student experience, learning and teaching and so on. In chemistry, in particular, over the last 10-15 years, we've developed a really strong core team who puts teaching and learning at the centre of everything we do. We're sector leading our national reputation for innovation in learning and teaching. Through that core team, we have a wide range of cutting edge practice in terms of teaching methodology, assessment feedback and the use of learning technologies. And Laura's part of that core team, and she's going to describe a journey she's undertaken involving the flipped classroom, and it's called Creating Learning Activities and Spaces for Digital Age Learners. So, thank you, Laura.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Dave, for the introduction, and thank you to Mark Warren, the organiser, for the invitation to speak. I was particularly kind of enthusiastic to speak at this meeting because I do think that the dialogue between people like me who deliver teaching and people like you guys who basically make it happen for us and so important, but quite often people don't think about it, it is important. I sometimes think that the dialogue isn't always as kind of efficient as it could be, so having this opportunity I think is really good for me. Yeah? Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, so as Dave said, I'm going to talk about kind of a journey that I've been on probably about the last kind of 3 years. And how this talk's going to be structured is, first of all, I want us to think about, do what we're calling digital age learners, do they learn differently? So I'm going to have a think about that. I'm going to be talking about the flipped classroom and whether it's appropriate for these learners. And then I'm mainly going to be talking about a case study in chemistry, my motivations for implementing new teaching methods. Firstly, using an e-learning resource, and then using something called team-based learning, which some of you may have come across before. And the need for flexible learning spaces and where we can go next from this. So, if we think about digital age learners, now Prensky, in I think 2001, identified something that he called a digital native that you may be aware of, and he argued that these digital natives did learn differently. And I think we can think about this. The current students, they're immersed in technology. So I graduated from my undergraduate degree 10 years ago. And even in that short time, I think our students now are immersed in much greater technology than I was when I was at university. But I am wondering, does this mean that they're more amenable to new learning technologies? Trevor said that one of the main barriers to using technology wasn't that it wasn't there, it was the people, and were they, happy to come on board? And I think it is an interesting question about whether students are more amenable to new learning technologies, because they're immersed in things like social media, WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat, all of that kind of thing, and they're very adept at using those things. But when it comes to different technologies, and the technologies that we might be using, we might be immersing those kind of social media technologies in our teaching, but in terms of other technologies, does this mean that they're more amenable to that? So maybe if we'll have a think about that, because I would like a kind of a discussion. I think it'd be interesting. And the other thing is they have almost infinite quantities of information available to them. If you just think about the web, that I didn't really have, or I wasn't really kind of adept at using, and they could construct knowledge from a variety of sources if we're thinking about learning. But do they construct knowledge differently if we think about how people learn? Are they more adept at using multiple sources to construct knowledge because they have, hundreds and hundreds of websites which might give them information as opposed to one textbook? And I'm not sure of the answers to this either, so I'd like us to think about that as well. That's digital age learners, but what about digital age educators? How are we different? Well, the main thing for us is that there's more technology is available because lots more things have been developed. So we're at an advantage to our predecessors because we have so many more tools available. Whether we're prepared to use them is another matter. But the important thing is that we have to make use of appropriate technology that enhances learning, not just include technology in our teaching because it's a gimmick. And I think another thing to kind of mention here is the difference between providing information, or the difference between information and the difference between knowledge, because they're not the same thing. You require information to construct knowledge, but just providing information isn't really enough. And I think the whole sector has been moving away from providing information and moving towards facilitating learning or facilitating the acquisition of knowledge. And I think I found this quote from someone called John Brown, where he said that knowledge is inextricably situated in the physical and the social context of its acquisition and use. And I think what that means is that we're having to consider the learning activity, the learning space, the learning environment in which people are learning. It's not just taking on board information and taking on board knowledge. Okay, so I think this is kind of quite well established. I'm sure I'm not telling anyone anything they don't know. So for a good many years, in fact, it was identified in the 70s that traditional lecturing was not the best way of teaching and it wasn't the best way of acquiring knowledge. But most university teachers will still be giving lectures. I still give lectures because it's the most straightforward way of providing information to a large amount of people. I mean, I'm kind of lecturing you now, aren't I? And the other thing is, it's the easy option. When we think about including other kind of innovative teaching methods, it requires a lot of effort and you've got to step outside your comfort zone to do that. So it's easiest for me just to, rock up with my prepared lecture and just give my lecture. But it's well established that this results in passive learning. People are just kind of sitting there waiting for the information to be absorbed. But if we're lecturing and we're teaching in that way, therefore outside the class, we're expecting students to be active learners. We're expecting them to do basically all the hard work outside the class. In an ideal world, we'd run small group tutorials because that's really where very effective active learning occurs. But increasingly, this isn't possible. We're all under pressure. There's more students, there's fewer staff. Our staff to student ratio is small. We can't be providing this, so we need to find alternatives. So the alternative that I've been exploring, and a lot of people have been exploring, is lecture flipping, which I'm sure you're all aware of. So this is where we're transmitting the information at home, and then the lecture time is made available for homework. Because the other thing to point out is ideally, you'd have the information transmission and the active learning happening all in the classroom activity, but we also have a time constraint as well. So in this model, maybe we can think about the students being passive learners at home, where they're taking on board some information, but there's not a lot of active learning going on. But then we're expecting them to be active learners in the classroom. And that's actually better because we can then facilitate their learning because we're there. And the whole point of this is to move towards kind of them reaching the higher levels of learning, if we think about kind of Bloom's taxonomy. And so they're really doing the problem-solving activities, which are going to make them kind of better at their subject, understand their subject more, and ultimately more employable, which is something that we all have to think about. But the implications of using a flipped classroom is that we need to be realistic about what we're expecting students to do. So are we expecting them to do too much at home? What if the students don't engage with the homework activities? What if students find group work and discussion really difficult, which is what we're kind of talking about if we're thinking about active learning and problem solving in the classes. You know, there's lots of students with individual learning requirements, and we need to consider them and how they'll kind of adapt to using this flipped classroom. So there's lots of different ways you can flip the classroom, lots of material you can give people in advance. So kind of traditionally, you might have asked them to read some textbooks or some articles. So those are our core chemistry textbooks stacked up. Students can buy them in a bundle at the beginning of their course. However, if you speak to a lot of people when they graduate, they will tell you that they've never opened them and used them as a doorstop. So actually, it's not very realistic for us now to give people textbooks. Students don't open textbooks as much as they used to. It makes me sad, and in an ideal world they would be, but they don't, so we need to give them a realistic activity. Okay, so you could provide lecture recordings. Maybe you've recorded lectures the year before and you're going to use them as your flip material. So I'm sure many of your institutions have lecture recordings available. We certainly do at Keele. Over the last 2 years, our playback system has been implemented. You could use screencasts, which are shorter recordings, arguably more effective because students don't have to concentrate for as long a period of time, or you could use interactive e-learning resources. So where I'm coming from in terms of how I flip the classroom is I have taught since 2012 a first year topic. It's organic chemistry. It's not particularly important what the topic is. But kind of all you need to know is that students really, really struggle with this topic, not just with me teaching it. There's a lot of literature across the sector. Students just find this really very difficult. And the reason they find it difficult is basically you can get no marks by memorising anything. Okay, you have to have a really good understanding of it and you need to be able to apply it. If you memorise it, chances are you're probably going to answer the question wrong. And well, as you can see, it really had not been going very well. So these are clearly very low marks, and it's very demoralising for a teacher and educator when this happens, because you do start to wonder whether maybe it's just you. So I wanted to do something about this because I'd been teaching this via lectures and a problem class, but this hadn't been working, so we need to do something else. So I had been preparing a lot of screencasts, so the short videos for students to watch at home to supplement their learning, but that hadn't really been helping, and I started to wonder whether actually just providing these screencasts, their passive learning that they were demonstrating maybe in my lectures, was just transmitting to watching these screencasts for their revision activities, and they were just kind of sitting there, you know, watching them as if they might, you know, watch a DVD or something, and just let the information wash over them without actually kind of participating in any way or, you know, doing problems to complement them. So what I decided to do was create an e-learning resource, and I created this using Articulate Storyline, which I suspect some of you are aware of. Now, I will just say that I'm no expert in creating e-learning resources, so I imagine it's probably quite basic. But the point of creating the e-learning resource was that I wanted there to be buttons to click, and I wanted there to be various pathways and some tests. So it wasn't just like, oh, I'll just get my popcorn out and watch my screencast. It was that they'd actually have to click on things. So if I just, hopefully I can just show you a little snippet of this. Okay, so it's obviously me speaking, and then you can click on the buttons.
Distributed in
hopefully.
Electronegativity affects electron density.
Okay, and there's stop and start. So things like that. So they're actually engaging with the material. So what I thought was, if I provide the e-learning resource to them in advance, and then I can spend my lectures, instead of it being a full kind of transmission of information lecture, I can be doing lots more problem-solving activities. So I replaced my 5 hours of lectures and 2 hours of problem classes with this e-learning resource, and then I had 7 hours that I could do these worked problem interactive lectures. I thought, this is great, they're all going to be doing lots of active learning in my sessions, they're all going to be having a really good understanding of it. So generally I demonstrate a worked problem, and then the students would complete a similar problem. And this is important for later. A lot of these classes generally took place in a lecture theatre. So it's interesting to think about how that might have affected things. So I did some questionnaires and analysis on these teaching sessions. And the results were interesting, although not wholly positive. So I asked them if basically the kind of interactive nature of the e-learning resource, being able to click on buttons and stuff, helped them engage with the content more effectively. And over half of them said that it did. Quite a lot of them didn't really seem bothered, and some disagreed. Okay, so that was relatively positive. Unfortunately, when I asked them to compare it to the short video screencasts that I've been preparing, only 10% of them said that they preferred the e-learning resource. Okay, so that's a bit of an issue. And almost half of them thought that they should have been given more thorough lectures in the topic. So it wasn't really a resounding success. And also, if anything, the exam marks are getting even worse. Okay, I mean, probably in terms of error, it's about the same. But generally, the students didn't mind the e-learning resource, but I don't think any of them really felt that it enhanced their learning very well. 65% of the class said they preferred standard screencasts. So I now had to think about this a bit more, and I wondered whether this was a motivational issue with the students. It was too much effort to engage with the screencast, the e-learning resource, as compared to just watching the screencasts. And so I thought about it, and when I kind of reflected upon what had been going on in my interactive lectures, the engaged and motivated students benefited from them, and they worked hard, but many didn't complete the work, and it was difficult for me to get round to all of them because I was in a lecture theatre. And basically they weren't being held account for what they'd done at home. Okay, so they could have interacted with the e-learning resource, or they could not have interacted with the e-learning resource, but I wasn't really to know that because they were just doing their own thing in the class. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, actually, maybe in terms of lecture flipping, it's not what you ask them to do outside the class that's important, it's what you ask them to do inside the class. So it's not just enough to create some kind of all singing, all dancing resource that they can use at home, but then you're just carrying on kind of doing something quite similar to what you were doing before, but more problem solving. So at the same time that I was considering this, I came across something called team-based learning. It's an education conference that I was at with my colleague. So those of you who haven't come across team-based learning before, it's not just working in a group or a team. That's not at all what it's about. Well, it is what it's about, but it's a lot more than that. So Michael Sweet, who was one of the kind of the founders of this type of learning, has described this as being a special form of collaborative learning with a sequence of individual work, group work, and immediate feedback, creating a motivational framework in which students hold each other accountable, which was the thing that I liked because, like I said, there was nothing that I could tell about what they'd done at home, or they didn't feel that they were being made, didn't feel accountable for anything. Coming to class prepared, which is important with lecture flipping, and contributing to discussion. Okay, so this all sounded good. So in terms of this framework, which is the most important thing about the team-based learning, it starts with pre-class preparation, which is basically your homework material. So this could be lectures, so you could actually have lectures before team-based learning activities, and indeed I do actually do that in some other of my teaching. It could be screencasts, it could be reading, it could be these e-learning resources that I created. So that's what they do outside the class. Then the first thing that happens when they're in the class is this readiness assurance process. Now there's all these terms, but it doesn't really matter what they're called, it's actually about what they're doing. So the first thing they do is the individual test, which is called the IRAT here. And this is where they complete a sequence of individual multiple choice questions in silence, in test conditions in the class. The next thing they do is something called a TRAT, which is they complete exactly the same questions they've just done, but they complete it in their team. And the answers are revealed by scratch cards, which I'll show you in a second. Then the instructor, so that would be me, undergo something called corrective instruction, where they'll go round as the teams are discussing it. If there's lots of teams getting the same question wrong, then you can spend some time going over that. And then we move on to something called the application activities, where they use the concepts that they've learned from the readiness assurance process, so they're multiple choice questions, to solve challenging problems. So the application activities are basically where you want the students to be at the end of their course. And there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of discussion. So the thing that a lot of people kind of associate with team-based learning is this scratch card. I do have some with me if anyone wants to see them later. So basically, we buy these scratch cards from the States, we buy them in bulk. But the important thing is there's lots of different types of these cards and they've all got a different sequence of what the correct answers are. So if the correct answer has got a star underneath it, and if the first one they scratch off isn't the right answer, they keep on scratching them until they find the star. And you can see here that this person has scored their teams, and so you get 4 points if you get the star on the first go, 2 on the second, 1 on the third, and then obviously none on the fourth. So they're immediately finding out if they get the right answer or not. And whilst it's like, it might seem like a bit of a gimmick, actually it's a really good tool to bring the team together and encourage discussion. I have kind of spoken at conferences about this before, and people have said, oh, well, couldn't you just do this with clickers, or couldn't you just do it on the computer or something? And yes, you could, but I don't think you get the same level of engagement, because it's a scratch card, it's fun, they get their penny out or something and they'll scratch it off. And there is kind of quite a buzz about the class when they're doing this, because it's exciting, it's more exciting than sitting there doing questions anyway. But this is the bit that people think about, but the hard work is done in the application activities. That's kind of where they get their problem solving. And the good thing about team-based learning is it's not only about the specific subjects that they're learning, there are lots of other skills that are enhanced by this. And these were just taken from the World Economic Forum's list of future skills. So Trevor was talking about how we're preparing students in a difficult environment that maybe we don't actually know what we're preparing them for. There's a quote that's spoken quite a lot about, we're teaching students to be able to do jobs that don't even exist yet. Okay, so we need to think about what the future skills are. So obviously the complex problem solving and critical thinking is in the actual activities they're doing. But these other 4, managing people, coordinating, decision making, negotiation, they're all involved in the actual discussion around the problems. So quite often, when they've done their individual multiple choice test, they'll be thinking, maybe you've got 3 of the group have got one answer and 3 of the group have got the other, and then they've got to negotiate with themselves to decide which one they're going to scratch off on the scratch card. Okay, so back to the topic that I was actually teaching. So I replaced all my lectures, apart from one, with 4 TBL workshops. I used the e-learning resource as my homework activity, my pre-class preparation, and they had to complete this in advance of the workshop. I did this for a class of, the first year I did it was 104 students, this year it was 120 students, and I had 20 teams of 6. And just to kind of put this in context, it was the same staff to student ratio had I been giving a lecture. So normally if you do a problem class activity, there wouldn't just be one academic member of staff for 120 students. But for these, it was just me and it was 120 students. And because of the nature of the activity, where they're all working in teams and they're helping each other learn, it doesn't matter that there's only one of me. They're not having a worse experience because it's to do with the discussion amongst themselves. And I'm really just facilitating that and going round and sorting out any problems if they arise, but there aren't really. So in terms of the module marks after implementing this, now I will put a caveat in here that I don't really like using module marks because, so I'm a chemist, and so when I'm thinking about what's a fair test, I'm thinking about we're using exactly the same subjects on both of the tests. You can't do that in teaching because it's not the same cohort. Because of the nature of what we do and we're always striving to make things better, it's never just that one specific teaching innovation that I've implemented that's the difference. There's lots of other things as well. You've never set exactly the same question in the exam because obviously they'll have seen that on the past exam question. There are so many things feeding into this, but I am happy to say that I think that there has been a slight improvement since using this team-based learning. You know, I mean, I could normalise it to other questions on other topics, but I think you start getting into the state where, you know, you can make the statistics say whatever you want them to say. So I'm not saying, you know, my module marks are amazing now, but I feel that they're better than they were. More importantly is what the students have to say about the team-based learning. And so again, I don't think it's massively useful whether they enjoyed something or not, but you can say if they are enjoying it, maybe they're more likely to be having a good learning experience. Okay, so almost everyone enjoyed the TBL workshop, so that's good. In terms of what you're trying to do in TBL, so having your team members help you with the problems, you helping other people. Again, almost everyone said that one of their team members had helped them to understand a particular concept. One that I found quite interesting was I asked them to say whether they thought that they worked harder in the TBL workshops than they do in lectures, because that's kind of the point, because you wanted them to be doing their passive learning at home and you wanted them to be doing their active learning in the class where you could facilitate that. And over half said that they agreed with that statement, and there were a lot of kind of neutral people where I think they can't really make up their mind. And I was quite surprised with the last question where I said I think we should have been given lectures in this topic, because apart from me giving an introductory lectures, they had no lectures. And this is quite a big topic and an important topic. And actually less than half of the class said they thought they should have been given lectures, which I thought was quite interesting, because generally students want everything. Quite often with teaching innovations that you try and incorporate, they'll say, well, I really like that, but actually I wanted that as well. They want everything. You know, so I thought that was quite interesting. In terms of kind of student feedback, these are just some free text quotes, and students can actually be quite insightful. So a couple of ones that I wanted to pick up on is, person who said it gives the opportunity to engage with other students and they can help explain, which also increases their understanding. So I think a lot of the time when you think about students explaining to each other, you might think, well, the better students, that's not helping them at all because they already know and they're explaining it to a weaker student. But actually, if you can teach something, that increases your understanding as well. Obviously, I liked the third one, which said literally 100% more useful than having someone talk at me for 2 hours and then do nothing with it. That's good. They found it more fun. That's not my primary aim, but you know, it's good that things are fun. In terms of negative quotes, and I think, you know, there's always going to be a flip side to these things. Of course, people wanted more lectures because, like I said, they want everything. The quote, the team didn't interact as much. This is a problem. If you end up in a team where 2 or 3 people don't want to engage, it makes it difficult for everyone else. But I do think that, again, we all know there are very few jobs where you just work on your own. You always have colleagues that you don't like very much or aren't very easy. Not you, Dave. but that's part of learning how to deal with it. So I think that's really helpful for that. In terms of my perception and colleagues' perceptions, because I'm not the only person using TBL at Keele, the students are more engaged in TBL workshops. Before, we'd run a 2-hour problem session. You get about 35 minutes good work from students, and then it'd be like, oh, you know, I'm just going to go and get something from the shop, or what are you doing tonight, or I'm just going to look at this on my iPad or whatever, and it just doesn't, you can't get much more than that out of them. But they are much more engaged in TBL workshops, and this is all down to the structure of the workshop. It's because it's separated into these different activities, the multiple choice questions, individual, team, doing the application activities, having the intervention from the instructor at points. I think I have to be realistic about the topic that I'm teaching. It's always going to be challenging. Like I said, across the sector it's an issue. It takes students a while to grasp the threshold concepts. Many of them don't get it until second year, but if I can help them a little bit more kind of along the way, then that's good for me. The one thing that I did notice when I was marking the exam, before with this topic, I'd be marking the exam and I'd be like, where have you even got that answer from? I don't understand. Lots of the answers are still wrong now, but it's easier to rationalise the mistakes that they've made. It's like their understanding still isn't at the appropriate level, but they're linking things together a little bit better. The one thing that I did find quite interesting about this is that when I re-polled them this year, after using TBL in conjunction with the e-learning resource, if you remember a few slides ago I said that 10% of them said that they preferred the e-learning resource. Well, you can see now after using TBL, it's more like kind of more than a third have now said that they prefer using the e-learning resource. But the amount of people who said that they preferred screencasts is massively down. It's less than a quarter as compared to 2/3, which I found really interesting. So does this mean that student perceptions of a homework resource can actually change as a result of what you do in class? If they think that they've had a more worthwhile experience in their class, does this change the perception of what they had to do at home? So I actually found that really, really interesting. Now, in terms of the logistics of team-based learning, obviously there's writing the questions and everything, but more importantly is actually the learning space. So if I've got 120 students in teams of 6, this requires 20 tables where students can face each other. So I actually came in here and I said to Dave, well, actually, we could run TBL sessions in here. This would be really good because we've got nice tables where we can all discuss things. So currently at Keele, all the large cohort flat rooms, so I'm talking about rooms that will seat 120 people, are configured traditionally. So they might be flat, but they're all configured in what I would call lecture format, so rows of desks. So for me to be able to run team-based learning sessions, this required willing volunteers to assist with the table reconfiguration before class. Okay, so I'm talking about 4 or 5 academics coming and helping me move tables before a class. So afterwards, I'd be really interested to hear about what provision you have for these kind of learning activities in your institution. So kind of in terms of how rooms are laid out that I've kind of looked and found about, so obviously a lot of these are at Keele. So this is our, on the left, this is our traditional room configuration. Those students are looking quite happy about it, but maybe they were told a photo was being taken. So we've got one of the buildings here, the Walter Mobley building, has recently been renovated, and in a lot of, in some of those rooms, they've got a flat room with writing tablet chairs, so the ones that come up like that. So technically you could move these around for group activities, but I don't really think that these are ideal for group work, because I think kind of having the barrier of the table in the middle where it's kind of a communal space where the work is happening on is a lot better than you've got your own table, but then if someone else wants to see something, they're kind of in your space, if that makes sense. So I don't actually think they're that great for group work. In terms of kind of some better configurations that I've found, so team-based learning goes on a lot at the University of Bradford. Their whole pharmacy course is taught via team-based learning. So they have lots of rooms set up with circular tables, with, you can see, a microphone and a laptop. So that's fine, but their whole course is set up for TBL. In a lot of places, whole courses aren't set up for a specific learning activity. We've got the concept room at Keele. I guess you might be seeing that or have seen it on a tour. But that's only got a capacity of 20. So in the concept room, there's group tables and it's got a central screen, which is really great. It would be really great for this kind of activity. But again, it only sits 20, and creating those kind of spaces is really expensive. So going forward, I think I would say that all new teaching and learning spaces need to be designed flexibly. So for me, this means chairs and tables on wheels. I love TBL. I think it's really changed the way that I teach. I think it's better for me. It's better for the students. They're more engaged. But the main barrier for me is the fact that I have to move these tables, and you're not just thinking about your 2-hour class, you're thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to be doing my weekly workout, moving my tables before that. But not everyone wants to do TBL. I'm sure loads of other people are doing lots of other innovative things, either in teams or maybe in a seminar style, things like that. So I think that going forward, that really all teaching and learning spaces need to have tables and chairs on wheels, so they can just be changed so easily, because we need to adapt. We need to adapt to digital age learners. We need to adapt to digital age educators, so they can facilitate learning in the best way that they can. So just to sum up, classroom flipping, it can be a really good way to increase engagement, but it can also not be a really good way to increase engagement. So you need to make sure that you've aligned the homework and classroom activities, and provide a clear structure. My problem when I just included the e-learning resource was that there was no real structure for my in-class activity. And also you've got to set realistic expectations about what homework activities students will engage with. On the way down, Dave actually asked me if people could have a good learning experience just doing TBL and not engaging with the e-learning resource. And I think the thing about TBL is that quite often in the first session that they do, quite a lot of them won't have engaged with the homework activity, but when they get there and realise that they've got to explain to their group why they've chosen a particular answer, and they can't because they've probably just guessed it because they haven't done any of the pre-lecture activities or pre-class activities, then the next time they have one of these sessions, they will have done something. The main thing at the moment for me is that academics may be deterred by the logistics of classroom flipping, because it's difficult. It's easier to give a lecture. Okay, so how are we going to make it easier for them? And to make it easier for them, then we need to make sure that our learning and teaching spaces are designed appropriately, because if that's easier in terms of flipping your classroom, then they might be more amenable to doing the other things that are challenges, like designing the material. Okay, so just want to say thank you to a few people. So this work has been supported by 2 Keele Teaching Innovation Funds, which have given me some money to implement these projects. There's quite a number of people in the Keele team-based learning group. So kind of the main person is it seems like the only guy actually, Graham Jones, who's kind of been driving a lot of this thing, and he's so passionate about it, and is really kind of supportive for everyone else. And also the Keele Chemistry, Medicinal Chemistry students, because quite a lot of the time you could be trying out your new teaching innovation, and sometimes it always doesn't go that well, but they're always kind of very, very happy to give you lots of feedback, which is really helpful for us. And thank you very much for listening.